Part 2 Fritz. We had already been on a sightseeing tour of the town. The famous fort of Bundi was placed amidst the hills. We had seen it from a distance that day, but decided to go back to take a closer look. The only reminders of the modern times were the electric poles. Otherwise, it seemed as though we were back in the old Rajputana. The streets were cobbled, the houses had balconies jutting out from the first door, the carvings done on these and the wooden doors bore evidence of the work of the master craftsmen. It was difficult to believe that we were living in the age of machines. I noticed Jayanto had turned rather quiet after arriving in Bundi. Perhaps some of his memories had returned. It is easy enough to feel a little depressed when visiting a place one may have seen as a child. Besides, Jayanto was certainly more emotional than most people. Everyone knew that. He put his cup down on the table and said, "You know, Shankar, it is really quite strange. The first time I came here, I used to sit cross-legged on these chairs. It seemed as though I was sitting on a throne. Now the chairs seem both small in size and very ordinary. The drawing room here used to seem so enormous, absolutely enormous. If I hadn't returned, those memories would have remained stuck in my mind forever." I said, "Yes, that's perfectly natural. As a child, one is small in size, so everything seems large. One grows bigger with age, but the size of all objects remains the same, doesn't it?" We went for a stroll in the garden after tea. Jayanto suddenly stopped walking and said, "Deodar." I stared at him. "A deodar tree? It ought to be here somewhere," he said, and began striding towards the far end of the compound. Why did he suddenly think of the deodar tree? A few seconds later, I heard his voice exclaiming jubilantly, "Here it is! Exactly where it was before." "Of course it was where it was before. Of course it's where it was before," I said. "Would a tree go roaming about?" Jayanto shook his head impatiently and said, "No, that's not what I meant. All I meant was that the tree is where I thought it might be." "But why did you suddenly think of a tree?" Jayanto stared at the trunk of the tree, frowning. Then he shook his head slowly and said, "I can't remember that now. I can't remember that now. Some European had bought me near the tree. Something had bought me near the tree. I had something here. A European? No, I can't recall anything at all. Memory is a strange business." They had a good cook in the circuit house. Later, in the evening, while we sat at the oval dining table having dinner, Jayanto said, "The cook they had in those days was called Dilawar. He had a scar on his left cheek and his eyes were always red. But he was an excellent cook." Jayanto's memories began returning one by one soon after dinner when we went back to the drawing room. He could recall where his father used to sit and smoke cheroot, where his mother used to knit, and what magazines lay on the table. And slowly, in bits and pieces, he recalled the whole business about his doll. It was not the usual kind of dolls little girls used to play with. One of Jayanto's uncles had brought him this doll from Switzerland, and it was a 12-inch long figure of an old man, dressed in traditional Swiss style. Apparently, it was very lifelike. Although it was not mechanized, it was possible to bend and twist its limbs. Its face had a smile on it, and on its head It wore a Swiss cap with a little yellow feather sticking out of it. Its clothes, especially in their little details, were perfect. The belts, buttons, pockets, collars, the socks. There were even little buckles on the shoes. His uncle had returned from Europe shortly before Jayanto left for Bundi with his parents. The little old man had been bought in the village of Switzerland, and the man who sold him had jokingly told Jayanto's uncle, "His name is Fritz. He is called Fritz. You must call him by this name. He won't respond to any other." Jayanto said, "I had a lot of toys when I was small. My parents gave me practically everything I wanted. Perhaps because I was their only child. But once I had Fritz, I forgot all my other toys. I played only with him. A time came when I began to spend hours just talking to him. Our conversation had to be one-sided, of course. But Fritz had such a funny smile on his lip and such look in his eyes that it seemed to me as though he could understand every word. Sometimes I wondered if he would actually converse with me if I could speak to him in German. Now it seems like a childish fantasy, but at that time the whole thing was very real to me. My parents did warn me not to overdo things, but I listened to no one. I had not yet been put into school, so I had all the time in the world for Fritz." Jayanto felt silent. I looked at my watch and realized it was 9:30 p.m. It was very quiet outside. We were sitting in the drawing room of the circuit house. An oil lamp burned in the room. I asked, "What happened to the doll?" Jayanto was deep in thought, still deep in thought. His answer to my question came so late that by that time I started to think that he had not heard me at all. "I had brought it to Bundi. It was destroyed here." "Destroyed? How?" We were sitting out in the lawn having tea. I had kept the doll by my side on the grass. I was not really old enough to have tea, but I insisted, and in the process, the cup tilted and some of the hot tea fell out my pants. I ran inside to change and came back to find that Fritz has disappeared. I looked around and found quite soon that a couple of stray dogs were having a nice tug-of-war with Fritz. Although he did not actually come apart, his face was battered beyond recognition and his clothes were torn. In other words, Fritz did not exist for me anymore. He was dead. And then, Jayanto's story intrigued me. What could possibly happen after that? I arranged his funeral, that's all. Meaning? I buried him under that deodar tree. I had wanted to make a coffin, but Fritz, after all, was a European. But I could find nothing, not even a little box. In the end, I buried him just like that. At last, the mystery of the deodar tree was solved. We went to bed at around 10. Our room was a large one, and our beds had been neatly made. Not being used to doing a lot of walking, I felt rather tired after the day's activities. Besides, the bed was very comfortable. I fell asleep barely 10 minutes after hitting the pillow. A slight noise woke me up later. I turned on my side and found Jayanto sitting up on his bed. The lamp by side of his bed was switched on, and in its light, it was easy to see the look of anxiety on his face. I asked, "What is it? Are you not feeling well?" Instead of asking my question, Instead of answering my question, Jento asked me one himself. Do you think the circuit house has got small animals? I mean, things like cats or mice. I shouldn't be surprised if it does. Why? Something walked over my chest. That's what woke me. Rats and mice usually come in through drains, but I have never known them to climb on the bed. This is the second time I have woken up actually. The first time I had heard a shuffling noise near the window. Oh, if it was near the window, it's more likely to be a cat. Yes, but Jento still sounded doubtful and said, Didn't you see anything after you switched the light on? I said, Didn't you see anything after you switched the light on? Nothing. But then I did not switch it on immediately after opening my eyes. To tell the truth, I felt rather scared at the first time. But when I switched it on, there was nothing to be seen. This means whatever came in must be still in the room. Well, since both the doors are bolted from inside, I rose quickly and searched under the bed, behind our suitcases, and everywhere else in the room. I could not find anything. The door to the bathroom was closed. I opened it and was about to start another search when Jento out to me softly, Shankar. I came back to the room. Jento was staring hard at the cover of his quilt. Upon seeing me, he pulled a portion out of it near the lamp and said, Look at this. I bent over the cloth and saw tiny brown circular marks on it. I said, Well, these could have been made by the cat. Jento did not say anything. It was obvious that something had deeply disturbed him. But it was 2:30 in the morning. I simply had to get a little more sleep, or I knew I would just keep feeling tired. And we had plans of doing a lot of sightseeing the following day. So, after murmuring a few soothing words such as, Don't worry, I'm here with you, and who knows, those masks may have been on your quilt already when you went to bed, I switched off the light once more and lay down. I had no doubt that Jento had only had a bad dream. All those memories of his childhood had upset him, obviously, and that was what had led him to his dreaming of a cat walking on his chest. I slept soundly for the rest of the night. If there were further disturbances, Jento did not tell me about them, but I could see in the morning that he had not slept well. Tonight I must give him one of the tranquilizers I brought with me, I thought. Thank you.